Hey everyone, welcome back. So I'm going to show you guys how to do a drawing like this, and I'm going to do this kind of like step by step with all the major things that I'm doing. And I'm just going to put this drawing right over here since I'm kind of running out of room. But what I do when I do draw an eye from the side is I first start with just the very basic shape, and I keep this really loose, right? So I'm like starting by just kind of like sketching out some basics, and you always want to remember that when you have an eye on the side, you kind of have something like this happening. So you have like this almost like V, like kind of a widened V. And then you have the iris here. And of course, depending on the person's angle, depends on how much of the iris you're actually going to see, right? So this part is a little tricky, right? Because you don't want it to look really bulgy, but the actual structure of the eye, like the iris, like this is a 3D structure, right? So like an eyeball is actually literally in the eye socket. But when you actually go to draw your eye, what you're going to start to realize is like this looks kind of weird, right? But if we go back to this one over here, like now that it has all this stuff around it, it starts to integrate the eyeball into the space and it looks more realistic. So when you draw an eye from the side, a lot of times it's not just about, you know, this part over here, but it's also about a lot of what you're going to do around this eye here. So I keep my line pressure pretty loose. Like I'm not starting like this. Like I did this just to show you, but I don't make harsh hard lines like this. I keep things really loose and gestural, at least at the beginning. And of course, if you're using pencil, that's just going to be a little bit different, but I'm using the pen directly. So we start with, basically the iris and then this, the eye socket here, the space that you see. And then you kind of tend to sometimes see a little bit of, let's see over here, like see this part down here, like over here. So we want to make sure that we show how it kind of comes around. And again, it depends on the person's angle. So sometimes you won't see this part here, which is kind of similar to like this part. But we want to, in this angle, this person's angle, I can see that. So I'm going to map that out a bit. And remember, whenever you're drawing the eye, what makes the eye look most realistic is the contrast. So in the actual iris, I'm going to get some contrast, which again is kind of like sudden changes from dark to light is what contrast essentially is. So similar to like if you have a photograph that's really contrasty, same idea. Okay, so now we're going to get to the an important part since we have this sort of like basic shape here. We'll put some of the eyelid here too before we do this. We got the eyelid and then we've got the lower eyelid. And again, I just really am like loosely kind of sketching in some of this, the shape. So see how like loose my arm is, like I'm kind of going around like that. I'm not really tight, like I'm not doing this. I'm kind of more like this with my arm. Okay, so now we're gonna do the eyelashes. And so the trick with eyelashes, whenever you're doing eyelashes, is that you want it to be kind of wispy. So like this, like almost like flicking your hand. See how my hand is going like this? If you don't do that and you're kind of like this, and you make them all the same and kind of chunky, it's gonna look kind of cartoony and a little bit odd. So you have to sort of practice that gestural kind of thing. Okay. And you also want to pay attention to where the eyelashes are coming out of, right? So they're kind of coming out of like the top part of the lid, not in here, but like up here. So if you put them in here, it's going to look a little bit weird. Sometimes they start here, but then they kind of come around like this. And that'll make it look realistic. But if you have it growing out of, the eyeball, that will obviously look weird. And what you want to also pay attention to is how long they are. So in this picture that I'm looking at as a reference, they're actually pretty long. Like they go kind of to almost to there. So you want to make sure that your scale is correct too. So again, they're growing out of the eyelid, even though they're coming into the space over here, they're still growing out of the actual eyelid. And pay attention to kind of like where they bunch together, because again, like you're not going to necessarily see it, like it won't be like this, right? They kind of cluster when they're together, like All right, so the next thing that's going to make your eye drawing more realistic is if you put some shading here in the white of the eye. So this is something that like a lot of times people who are new to drawing just will forget to do that because they're kind of thinking white of eye, right? So white of eye, you'd think that like it would be white, but it's really not white. It's usually picks up some shading or some shadows. So a little bit of that will help your drawing. So as I said at the beginning, a lot of what's going to make the eye look most realistic is not just how you draw this part right here, but how you draw this whole area around the eye. So now what I'm doing is I'm going around it and I'm making sure that I'm shading some of the lower eyelid. And I'm also thinking about the brow bone up here. And so in terms of like your line direction, think about like this is kind of what's happening with the eyelid. Like this is sort of like direction wise. And then this is sort of like direction wise when you think about your brow bone. And that'll help you think about what line direction to use. So I like to use line direction kind of like going up like this, maybe. So this section here tends to be pretty dark because it's where the crease, crease and your brow bone starts. And so your eye is like literally going into that space, which makes the shadow. I might add a little bit more eyelashes on the bottom too. Look at how this comes over here too with this part, like in this section too. Of course, I'm going over this a little bit, which is not ideal, but it's okay. So let me know in the comments, if you're struggling with drawing from the side, what are some of the issues that you're dealing with, and I will respond. Let me know if this was helpful. I hope that this gives you some ideas of things to try when you're drawing an eye from the side. Okay, thanks as always for watching. Bye.